Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the literary aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Leona, Cobham, welcome back.
Hello, Liz. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to see you. You have a new book. So I interviewed you, I think, at the end of 2023, about the two flying circus books that you had in place at the time. At the time, we didn't have any female characters, and now we do. So give us a summary and an update on everything. Tell us about this new book.
So my books are just trying to make aviation accessible and exciting to young readers. And I've tried to come up with imaginative ways to do that by bringing in characters who are iconic aircraft in their own right, and then their personalities reflect their skill sets as individuals. And there's an element of humor which children love. I won't start complaining about the fact that nobody's reading as much as they used to, but because they don't read very much, when you do have their attention, you want to really make sure that you are honoring that and respecting their attention. So I've tried to pack in lots of technical information about aviation, but also some emotionally resonant themes that I think are really important for youngsters, just to equip them for life, really negotiating the challenges of life.
Yeah, and so that's what we got out of those first two books as well. So what's new in this one?
So in this one, I've, as you mentioned, there's this character, the Nighthawk, who did appear in the second one as well, and she comes back again. And the great thing about Nighthawk is that she's actually not one of the flying circus. So as the books have evolved, there's a concept that's evolved in my head, which I would call the flying circus code. You know how in Mandalorian they say this is the way, and I like to think that I've got a flying circus way, and I've really developed that in this book. In fact, the last story is called Firmitas, which is the Roman personal virtue of integrity and tenacity, and I've tried to really hone what that means and how that way or that code, if we find our own code, and each one of us will have our own unique one, which suits our personal area of brilliance, because we all have flavors of greatness, we just need to find them. That can then be our moral compass. And so I've really tried to develop that idea. And the nice thing about Nighthawk is that because she's not actually part of the flying circus, she comes in and she will have the knee-jerk reaction to life that many of us have when we're not really consciously deciding on our reaction to a situation. So rather than responding, we react. Nighthawk automatically feels that. And in this first story, for example, she comes into a very close call, almost a collision with this rogue plane, a Hercules, who's got his own reasons for being rogue. And she's furious, absolutely furious, as we would be. A lot of people would be, wouldn't they? And especially young, kids who, you get into the playground and somebody comes and jabs you, you want to jab them back. And that's perfectly natural. But the flying circus suggests to her that perhaps there's a better way, and that's to try and find resolution. And so it's been lovely to work with Nighthawk because it's provided me with a canvas to illustrate how we can modify our behavior if we just think things through a little and develop this idea of a moral compass and perhaps think about the flying circus way.
That's so wonderful. So, for people who haven't listened to that first interview or haven't had a chance to read these books, can you just give us like the highlights of the main characters of the flying circus and what kind of aircraft they are?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are four friends, and they're each entirely different, which is great fun because then they have unique skills. So we've got Woody, the little biplane, who's a tiger moth, who was extremely important as an aircraft. The tiger moths were used to train a lot of pilots in the Second World War, both US pilots and in the UK, actually. And he can do all sorts of clever things like fly incredibly slowly and not need a nice tarmac runway to take off. He and those abilities come in. I use the stories to show how those abilities, while we might just laugh because he goes so slowly, and the tomcat does laugh, uh, but actually he can then bail out the tomcat because he can do things that the tomcat can't do. Which brings me to Tom, who I absolutely love, my F-14 Tomcat, fighter plane, incredible airplane, um, and but he's a genius. He's got these extraordinary navigation skills. He can just do all sorts of things that the others can't possibly think of doing. Partly because his extraordinary speed. He can go at Mach 2. So he's a legend, but he also has moments where he struggles with feelings of just of feeling attacked, actually, of feeling not insignificant despite his greatness. He just feels unseen very easily, and when he feels unseen, that triggers him, and then he'll go and do something crazy. And then the flying circus, his friends, the camaraderie is really important in this because they will come and help him to realize that he doesn't need that external validation. And so that's quite a nice topic to introduce as well, because I think that's something that a lot of young people struggle with, and not only young people, frankly.
Right.
So that's Tom, and then we've got the Vulcan, who is he's a wonderful aeroplane, a great big bomber, beautiful aeroplane with his delta wing, but he's quite old, and he's feeling his age. He keeps having issues with his landing gear not deploying properly, and he's already had a close call, actually, where he was going to be grounded, like the real story, the true story of the Vulcan. Um, which was eventually grounded very sadly, because we just couldn't keep flying the Vulcans even for air shows. But this Vulcan, our Vulcan in the book, gets a second chance because he gets taken by the flying circus, adopted. Um, but he still has this niggle, this concern about his age, and when things go wrong, he suddenly thinks, "Oh no, is this the end?" And so it's all about, for him, it's about realizing that we don't need to be perfect. We can still bring something to the table, even with our imperfections. So that's made quite clear in the second story, actually, in this book, where he has this problem with his landing gear, and it's quite funny as well. It's quite humorous because he's got to act as a clinic for a country fair, and he can't believe that now he's just a little clinic instead of what he was once, which was his country's deterrent against international threat. But
Wait,
he
what
comes
does that mean, a clinic?
well, he's a clinic in the sense that he's a traveling ambulance. He's an air ambulance
I
because the
see.
the,
Okay.
the air ambulance is out of action for the show,
I
for
see. So
this
he's
country
filling
fair.
in.
And so he's
Hmm.
been brought in, but he's thinking, hang on a minute, I think I'm the one who needs the ambulance here. I've got these problems myself. And so he's got to sort of step up. So I would recommend read the second story because it's a funny one, which is always good. I always try to include one, which is a sort of laugh out loud story. And when readers write to me and say, I couldn't stop laughing, it's the best. It's the best feedback. And then
That's great.
finally, last but not least, we have the Spitfire. And so we all know about the Spitfire as an aeroplane. And he's characteristically traditional and a natural leader, but at the same time, he needs to be flexible in today's times, and that he struggles with slightly. But he does manage to do it, and it's again another skill that one needs to develop this flexibility, trying to understand the opinions of other people, opinions that seem to clash with our own. And so I use him to showcase that particular uh, challenge.
Well, I think these books are wonderful. I love the way that each chapter is sort of its own little story, almost a parable in itself,
Yeah.
with a life lesson. I watched an author, a children's author, did she wrote A Long Walk to Water. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she did a TED talk on the importance the of reading books like these for children to navigate life, to give them various scenarios in which they're faced with real world challenges, but in a creative way, and are
Mm.
given the tools to navigate those challenges and opportunities. And so that's one of the things that I love about it. And of course, the creative presentation in these vintage aircraft, which I have become more educated about and more attached to in recent months, as we've been talking a lot about Spitfires. We've been talking about the Tiger Moth, Amanda Harrison, who attempted to fly solo in Amy Johnson's footsteps. And then I've recently been reading about Amy Johnson and reading a lot about your grandfather, Sir
Mm.
Alan Cobham, who, when we talked last time, you highlighted his involvement in air to air refueling. But I have been discovering that he was very, very much involved in pioneering aviation in many, many other ways. Just give us a little summary of your grandfather and your relationship with him again.
Yeah, he died when I was very young. So my relationship with him is through learning about what he did and also feeling that Cobham, that thing that runs through your veins that drives you, you know, passion. He was absolutely passionate. And if you look at YouTube, recently I saw some clips on YouTube that I had never seen before, actually, of him talking direct to the camera about aviation and about flying and how we must get people air minded. And it was just priceless. It really is. It's
Oh, you'll
excellent.
have to send me a link to that and I'll include
Yeah,
it in the show notes. Amazing. I
I
can't
will.
wait to see that.
I will.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, he was doing this at a time when aviation was in its infancy,
Mhm.
aviation for the people, for
Right.
everybody. It was quite a specialist and quite an for some it was just a hobby and quite an
Yeah.
expensive hobby. For him, it was his career, and then his business when it came to developing air-to-air refueling. But he took people up on their first flights. He went around the country giving, with this flying circus, which is where I got the idea, the concept, and giving people their first flights and just making um, aviation accessible. And I love that. It's actually very helpful not to know very much about aviation because I can then explain these topics in quite simple terms for others and children who don't know much either. Even radar, sometimes I'll go to schools and they have a very hazy understanding of radar. And I had a pretty hazy understanding of it before I started writing, and let alone the concept of coffin corner, when you go when an airplane flies very, very high, close to its flight ceiling. I did a lot of research for that, and then I thought, how on earth am I going to explain it? And I thought, just get it down to its most basic, bare bones, and then that's nice because it leads on to an aerofoil and why the shape of an aeroplane is important and the impact and how you can change it. So then trim, you've got things like trim, and how the Vulcan, he comes in, he's really worried about his landing gear still in the second book. So he wants to come in really slow. And so he alters his trim, he puts out his air brakes, which they had. And so, yeah, so as I say, not knowing much is actually a great asset.
Yeah, because you're willing to do that research and explain it clearly. Well, so that's another thing that I love about this is that you're not just introducing the characteristics of these aircraft, but various concepts in aviation. So again, a very creative way to introduce aviation concepts and aviation to a young audience with meaning. So I'm wondering, now this is your third book. First of all, do you have plans for more? And secondly, how are you getting this book out there? Are you participating in any aviation events in the UK? Where can people go find you? Tell me about that.
Right. So I'm actually now going big on my presentations at schools. This is a new phase for me, and I'm really enjoying it because then I get to actually meet the children, and I love it. I used to work as a classroom as a reading assistant in classrooms, and that was great, helping children learn to read. And I really miss that contact. So now I'm putting together two different presentations. One more along the what we call STEM. Do you have that concept in the US as well? STEM topics,
Of
sort of.
course, we have STEM, and then we talk, science, technology, engineering, math, but then we also have STEAM, which is the arts, so that brings in the literacy as well. So yeah,
Oh, right. Interesting. Right.
yeah,
So that's
full team.
exactly, I've got two presentations. One is STEM and one is STEAM, which is good. I didn't know about STEAM as an acronym. I'm going to start using that. I like that. So yeah, so the STEM one is going big on these aviation topics or the topics that the books raise, like, radar, for example, and stealth. What does stealth mean? And that kind of thing. And then the other one is actually more to do with creative writing and how we all have a story because we all have our lives and our lives are a story, and so yeah, so it's just encouraging kids, boys and girls, to write and think about how and using my books as a way of showing them the idea of a point of view in writing because they're young, they won't know necessarily about point of view, but it's actually really helpful to be aware of that. So that's what I'm up to in terms of working on getting my books out there now, just going straight to the children and through via schools.
That's perfect. And do they go to your website to find a way to get in touch with you? And yeah,
That's what I'm putting together. Actually, I've got somebody who's been very helpful. It's always good to have a new set of eyes, actually. And she came in to help me with initially just with getting book reviews and so on, and looking at the book, and then I start. And she got some interest from schools. And I thought, gosh, I really want to pursue this. And she looked at my website and said, well, you should have something. Apparently, it's called a media pack. So I'm now doing that. I'm going to have a tab there on my website on the homepage, which is the media pack. And so when schools want to contact me, they just go straight to that, and they'll have all the information they need there. So that's something that's just I'm going to put together over the summer now.
well, since you're just starting, and since I've had the opportunity to just talk to so many authors, and for any writers out there who are targeting sort of this age group. And speaking of which, what target age group do you find? What who is your target? What is the age group that you're targeting?
It's actually 7 to 12
Yeah.
because
So,
that's talking play. It's talking machines, and talking machines is difficult because people think, oh, that's going to be for a much younger readership. But my writing style isn't for the very young readership. So I'm saying 7 to 12, and then I'm finding that adults come back saying some adults who enjoy aviation, they come back saying, oh, I loved your books, and also families with connections with the armed forces.
right,
You know?
of course. Well, so we would call that middle grade in the U.S.
Yes.
And there are lots of authors who get super creative where you can only be in so many places at so many times. But there are a lot of authors who offer also some sort of free activity guidance for the classroom for teachers to employ these books independent of the author being able to be there. And so
Mm.
that's another idea that you can add some STEM activities, suggestions for teachers, which will be helpful for getting the books out to the children, even if
Yeah.
you can't be there.
I
And
love that
also,
idea. I love that
yeah,
idea. It's the activities that cause the most chaos that are the most successful, I
of
find. So
course, always,
things like making paper airplanes,
of course,
and then testing them out in the classroom. Wow,
absolutely,
that's great fun.
yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if you've seen on my website, have posted an article about these outreach events that I do. I use a bingo card that I do. So, like when you go to the classroom, you could have, there's just all kinds of creative ways to engage the children and keep their attention. They love that stuff. So.
Yeah, so that's on your website, is it? I can find.
It's just an article about me doing that. I have some laminated cards that I take
Yeah.
out to youth outreach events. I was looking for ways, when I come to, and this is what I like to say, is that I bring the STEAM to the STEM activities, because when we have outreach events, the children walk into this giant hangar, and some of them are like, they are super excited about the big aircraft and the big engine, and or they're excited about the various like arts and crafts or making paper airplanes. But other children are readers, and I can see them, like they do a beeline for me, they come straight for me, and those kids are easy to engage with. But the other ones who are sort of walking by and they see a table of books and maybe it's intimidating, and they don't know how, and I don't know how to reach them and they don't know how to reach me. Well, I have this game that keeps them at the table, and everyone's a winner if you play long enough. And I feature characters throughout aviation history who are reflected in the books in front of me. So it's kind of a game for them to figure out if they can identify the book, and then I always tell them the answer at the end. But then they have a little prize. So like there are just all these fun ways that you can think of to engage with the kids, and then offer those activities. This one is just me doing it because it's expensive to print these things, but you can offer the materials online for people to print themselves, which I haven't done yet. I probably should, but anyway,
Right. Okay. Yeah,
lots of
that's
fun.
all these ideas are really good. So
Yeah.
you just got to have also, if you're going to do experiments, you've got to have something that's probably going to work. That has you know, a good chance of working. And some of these ones where you're trying to get something to fly, you've got a helicopter idea with a rotor.
Yeah.
It's touch
You don't.
and go, and when it doesn't work, they all go,
Yeah,
oh.
that's depressing. Yeah, you want them to be successful for sure. Exactly. That's why everybody's a winner if they play with me. They play
That's
long enough,
good.
and then they'll learn. They'll learn even more information.
Yeah,
So,
quite. Yeah.
well, this is so fun. So, any plans for future books with these characters or any others?
I am planning a future book because the last story in this book, the one that's called Firmitas, um, you won't believe it, but actually I go back to Roman Britain somehow, and you're going to find out when you read the book how I managed to go back to Roman Britain. But in doing so, I explore quite a bit of history in the same way that we did in the second book. We went to the Battle of Waterloo, and so we found quite a lot out about Napoleon and Wellington, and in a fun way. Um, and then I've become really interested actually in history and writing about history for this age group, and I'm going to be pursuing that for my next book. So we'll see how that goes. It's a slightly different project, but it might be quite a lot easier for me in terms of marketing because I get away from the talking planes thing, which has been, publishers just say, "Oh, I'm not sure about talking planes for this age group," and it's just I'm a bit overhearing that. So
Yeah, that is so odd. I mean, we have all kinds of books on the market that feature animals talking for that age group, and all kinds of
yeah,
fantasy books. So, yeah, no, I love it. I love the concept, and I think it's really engaging. So, yeah.
thank you, Liz. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, good luck with the future book. And thank you again for your love of aviation, even though you're not involved in it, and bringing that history alive for children and for those of us, to learn about these aircraft and learn these lovely life lessons that you teach us in these books.
Thank you, Liz. That's very kind.